So while everybody else is joining, let me start with a short intro. So today we have with us here in Zurich, Puja. Puja is working for Flashbots, which is an extremely interesting project. I would say, yeah, it is the forefront of MEV research and development, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We will be talking about Puja's recent research direction. She has published a paper together with Glen, who we had here on this meetup, and Vitalik, who we have not had on this meetup. That has, I think, struck a nerve with a bunch of crypto people from many different angles. And yeah, that has implications on how people actually interact with blockchain-based identities or some claims about their identities. And yeah, I think it's a pretty fascinating topic, and looking forward to hear more about that from Puja. I'm just going to bring up her presentation.
Yeah, well, I can actually talk. I would love to talk. And is there a way to see the participants? Is there a way to see their faces as well? Is that?
I'll try to make it happen.
I like to just, since this is a community meetup now, see who else is here.
I don't know how to make that happen. I think it just shows the ones with camera. So whoever wants to show their camera on face, you're invited to do that.
Okay. All right. So it would.
Sure.
I wish Zoom had like a voting function. I would love to know kind of what everybody's context here is. So I'll give an introduction, high level overview about why we wrote the paper, DSOC, or at least what my motivation was. And the general idea is we're actually more trying to answer a question. And the question is, how do we achieve broad, complex network coordination for the 21st century to solve global problems and networked problems, but in a decentralized, bottom-up way. And so what do I mean by decentralized? I mean, so a particular social group, nation state, set of actors, corporations don't come to dominate everybody else. And also where the network's power at whatever social scale we're talking about doesn't dominate the power of the layers underneath it of social coordination. And so that was kind of the broad-based motivation. And there are a few key principles of the paper. You don't need to share the slides.
Okay.
It's okay. There are a few key principles of the paper. One is the idea of local control and the idea that those close to a problem have the greatest stake in its resolution. And another key idea of the paper was this idea of called consensus across difference, which you might have read before in like RadicalxChange papers, particularly by Glen. And the idea there is that consensus by the most diverse members of a group is likely to signal broader shared networked goods than say consensus amongst a very similar people, very similarly affiliated individuals who might be accidentally coordinating or intentionally colluding to their benefit and trying to capture the benefit, the network to their benefit. So those were the sort of broad-based motivations and principles. I'm curious, we can take this conversation in a couple of different directions, but if anybody had any reactions or questions to the paper, I'd like to kind of get started in that way. And if there's no questions, maybe I can take us through the paper from a different angle, from the perspective of science and scientific coordination, which I think is actually a very good first use case. So let me just open the floor now to just general questions.
So
I think Katza raised her hand for his.
Hey guys. Hey, hi Puja. I'm on the way to becoming a fan. I'm pseudonymous, so I won't switch on my camera, but I'm Katza to anyone who can pronounce it, and Kat to anyone who can't. So I've always been on the intersection of crypto altruism in general, and more than soulbound tokens, it was more about community identity. We've also seen cases in the past. I've been in crypto for a long time, where you have issues with family members passing on crypto inheritance when they've been deceased, and that has always led us to talk about communal or stuffed NFTs in some sense, that are stuffed via a social currency. So I guess soulbound, or whatever it is that you want to call it from a nomenclature standpoint, has always been interesting from a proof of identity standpoint. And I come here from with curiosity. I've read the paper. I think I would be lying if I said I digested all of it. So I'm just here to hear your thoughts on it.
So you were mentioning the issues of kind of asset-backed NFTs and crypto inheritance. That's what I gathered.
I think it has more to do with social credibility and social currency as a wielding power. Like if my father trades crypto, for instance, and wants to hand over a few Bitcoin after he's deceased, but he has a Coinbase Pro account and he doesn't have any way to justify that I'm his next of kin or such, these are common problems. They could occur a lot more as institutional capital adopts crypto. So what do we do from a communal standpoint, where how do we bring in the community, the social, the familial aspect into crypto? Because I get that the nomenclature in the terminology in the paper is soul bound, but I also see that as more social bound or community bound or some such. So yeah. It's just
So your question is how do we apply this to simple coordinations like families and inheritance, right?
For starters, that's one case. There could also be several others, you know, passing on land rights or indigenous land rights, tribe to tribe. You know.
Right. Sure. Yeah, so you're right that soulbound could also be community for sure. I think someone's mic is on. If you could just mind turning off your mic. Thank you. So let's just take a step back on what are the primitives we're talking about. So in the paper, we introduced this idea of soul-bound tokens. You can also call them community-bound tokens. And these tokens represent your memberships, affiliations, credentials with communities, right? And so there are different levels of privacy and publicity we talk about in the paper. But for a, say, community, a unit of coordination that's your family, you would obviously want to have a higher level of privacy, right? And you would want to share information with your family, but not anybody else. So what soulbound tokens let us do is represent these memberships, right? And including a membership to your family, in that case, with a higher level of privacy. And what it also does is that you can't really understand soulbound tokens without understanding this idea of community recovery, which is that you are the intersectional node of your social network, and recovery of your wallet is always possible by leaning into your network for recovery, leaning into your community. So in that sense, you can't ever credibly sell your wallet holding your non-transferable tokens, because you could always recover it through your community. And there's a lot of, it's like an area of research that we're working on how to actually accomplish that. So if you think about yourself, your identity as the nexus of your social relationships, including your relationships with your family and your memberships with your family, then yeah, you could absolutely program inheritance to, say, your children and program that, right, with your family. And our goal in that case would probably be to do that in a privacy-preserving way, right? Not to make that public, but actually just partially private to the members that are coordinating in your family. So it does offer a substrate, social substrate to do things. If we solve a lot of, you know, incentive challenges and community recovery, it does offer the social substrate to do complex things like inheritance, and coordinate that amongst families in a way where, say, that, you know, you don't have to worry about necessarily like losing your keys because you have community recovery, right? And you can never even credibly sell that, or even credibly sell your inheritance rights. And so if you take it like a next step up, it also lets you do, for example, you were talking about community resources, say indigenous lands. Absolutely, communities that have shared resources could use Soulbound tokens to not just represent membership to those communities, but represent permissions and access rights of, using and consuming resources within that community, and could, offer a way to steward resources. We've got like a third member here. Steward resources in much more pluralistic ways than we currently can do, not just with blockchains, but off blockchains as well. I hope that answers your question.
Puja, the question
Yeah.
I had a question there actually when reading the paper on this social recovery. When I look at social recovery has been, I think, prominently introduced in crypto through Argent, I would argue. Like this crypto wallet, maybe some of you are familiar with it. They have it on it's a mobile wallet where I could say, Puja can recover my wallet, or Puja and Tom together. When these two come together, they can recover, or one of them might be a hardware wallet. And one thing that I've been wondering is this kind of weird intersection between social recovery and security. And specifically that being in a mobile setting, which is just dominated by this duopoly of Apple and Google, neither of which I particularly trust. So if we have this whole supply chain behind that, doesn't social security make us even more reliant on supply chain and supply chain issues?
I'm not sure I follow. So the idea, let's take like the standard social recovery model. The standard social recovery model is I go out and I pick a set of guardians that I know and say some qualified majority of those guardians. If I like lose my keys, they can come in, right? And I can park on those, qualified majority of them, and then I can recover them. But like that is not really great because it's like very taxing. I have to keep track of the guardians, make sure I stay in their good graces, right?
Exactly.
That I'm not alienated. I also have to make sure that they're not talking to each other, right? That they're sort of maximally diverse, right? And uncorrelated. And so community recovery is just doing that more on a kind of programmable way. So taking the communities which you are members of as represented by your SVT tokens, and say drawing on the most maximally uncorrelated diverse set of members of those communities to serve as your guardians, updated in real time, right, in an uncorrelated way. So they're not, they don't have side communication channels. They also even don't know if necessarily they're guardians. And this isn't an easy problem to solve, right? You have to solve questions around recency bias and other issues. But the idea is that you could, if you see yourself as a nexus of your social relationships, right, your security is in the diversity of your social relationships. And so it's sort of security and diversity.
Yeah. So I guess my concern comes from the fact that inherently this is a graph, right? So you and Tom might be my guardians, and there's guardians of yours. So basically you can build a graph. And I'm concerned about the question of what is the minimum number of people that I need to compromise in order to compromise a large subgraph of this whole graph, right? Because if I, have a bunch of root guardians through which I can like reconstruct a whole lot of others, then that's a potential security threat. And now in Argent's case specifically, they all run on mobile phones, right? These mobile devices are exclusively controlled by Apple and Google, as happens to be the case through these two app stores. It seems that it's actually relatively easy for a very small number of people to actually ship, for example, to this select number of kind of nuclei of social recovery, a malicious backup to which I can reconstruct a whole lot of things.
It seems like the problem is piggybacking these mechanisms on an iPhone or or Google. So you probably want to develop these mechanisms outside of centralized infrastructures and have them be native to to the chain itself, right? So I'm not an expert on recovery mechanisms. I just so I can't give you sort of like, okay, like this is the anti-correlation mechanism. And obviously, as soon as you like state what that mechanism is, then like, right, you're opening yourself up to being, right,
to being gamed in that new way.
Right. So yeah, so it's definitely a tricky problem, but the fundamental idea. So I would say if you're piggybacking on centralized infrastructure, you don't get security and diversity, right? But the idea,
especially in a dual.
Yeah. So you want to, security and diversity means the diversity of your social relationships, right? And so in that way, you're actually kind of like encouraged to form, maybe step out of your social, bubble and form more diverse relationships. And the more kind of social interconnections you have with groups of people, and this is kind of just a general theme of the paper. The theme is getting folks that are already cooperating with their communities partially to step outside of their social sphere and cooperate with other communities that are also cooperating with themselves partially. And so you get these partial cooperations that build into network coordination. So and the community, taking it back to community recovery, the idea there would be for people to step out of, say, if obviously if you grow up in like a small town and your set of relationships are the people you've grown up with your whole life, and that's like not a great way. That's not really security and diversity, right?
Yeah.
So you would obviously want to have relationships, and we sort of do that now anyway in the internet age, right? We form friends and friendships on Twitter with people we've never met from weird places and unheard places, and right?
Yeah. I was actually, though, just thinking in the opposite direction, kind of being based in Switzerland, we do see a lot of kind of community-based operations. I think Switzerland is per capita having the largest number of associations. So there is a lot of communal organizations and a lot of kind of communal activities that are enshrined in Swiss culture. I say that as a non-Swiss citizen myself, by the way. But so I'm just thinking, what are good examples where such diverse community interactions are being observed? Because maybe crypto isn't the best example, because I would argue the crypto ecosystem is not very diverse and is, fairly,
Well, I think it's not just sort of where you're from. The whole point actually of the paper is to define identity as social identity. So we're trying to move away from this paradigm of identity being what you're accidentally born into, time, place of birth, so on, and what you intentionally grow into, the communities, memberships, and affiliations, which you self-identify with over time. So I'm sure there's actually a bunch of different affiliations that you have, say, part of RadicalxChange, part of working for this company, part of being a Swiss citizen, part of, right? There's all these other aspects of you that make you your unique constellation. And I have a unique constellation, right? And there's like an overlap in our Venn diagram with RadicalxChange, right? Yeah. And so when you're calculating correlation discounts, it's not like just looking at one dimension. It's like a sort of multidimensional parallelized process. And in that sense, you really get a much more complex, richer perspective of how correlated or uncorrelated people are. I think you're actually probably much more richer and diverse than you imagine in your affiliations, and everybody is, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it's about embracing the plurality of the different connections that people form.
Correct.
Is there, in the meantime, questions from the audience? Anybody wanting to know something from Puja on soulbound tokens? I think, by the way, this term of soulbound tokens was triggering some people out there. Mm-hmm. That seemed a little bit annoying. Now looking at it, would you call it differently, or?
I really, so this is a question, why did we call it Soulbound? First of all, the memes are great, right? It was a lot of it was a lot of fun writing the paper, and as I was going through the sections, I was like, oh, airdrops to soul drops, like this is right, and like making it soulful, right? And it did, the point of the paper was to just really create a portal into people's minds and be a napkin sketch in social incentive design, not to be a technical specification. So I think there's, many technological substrates we can do this on, and technological substrates we haven't even imagined, right? So we're not enshrining soulbound tokens, as a technical standard or specification here, right?
Mhm.
I do think one of the reasons why I liked souls and the concept of souls is, you're careful with your soul, you shepherd your soul, right? And when even people think about souls and, if say from even a spiritual dimension, they think about relationships and families that souls have, right? And the sort of financial aspects kind of fall off. You don't want to financialize your soul. You don't want to sell your soul, right?
Yeah.
You want to shepherd it and take care of it and make sure you form soulful connections. So that was the intent behind it, and it was obviously it's a metaphor. But yeah, I guess it triggered people in unexpected ways. I think.
But triggering also brings discussion, so maybe that's not bad.
Yeah.
Maybe the reaction was not friendly towards you and the other authors, but I did see it trigger discussions and reactions and make people think. So
Yeah. I think one of the observations that I made was the folks who were most triggered by it, I feel like actually tend to come more from a self-sovereign paradigm, which is ironic.
Yeah.
And the folks who really liked it tend to come from, and by the way, those self-sovereign paradigm folks preferred community-bound tokens. That was okay, so now I'm defining my relationship to community, right?
Yeah.
And the folks who loved the soulbound, they already sort of are in this kind of pluralistic framework, seeing themselves within nested networks of cooperation. And for them, they actually preferred the soulful aspect rather than the community aspect. So it's kind of interesting. I would have predicted the opposite.
It's a bit ironic.
Yeah, no, it's totally. I would have predicted the opposite. So yeah.
Nice. I see.
Seb?
Got a hand up here. We have a question.
Yeah. Nicholas.
Hi, Nicholas.
So hi everyone, thank you for these nice presentations. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to to listen to most of it because I wasn't available at 11. But forgive me if there is something I say that has been already answered. So my name is Nicolas. So I work in fields related to Filecoin, IPFS, decentralized identity, and this kind of stuff. And I'm new to this field, and I learned a lot about decentralized identifier, DIDs, verifiable credentials, this kind of standards. And so I think my question bounces back to what you just said. Like many people were bothered in the self-sovereign identity field because I kind of feel like I understand why, because I think that this kind of problems of identifying a person, an entity, an object, or something seems like has been researched for a long period of time by researchers, and they came up with this solution called DIDs, which is becoming standard in many areas, which is cheap, which is not bound to one specific chain, because I don't know if you know, I mean, probably the wider audience don't know about what DID is. DID is a URI, like that is resolvable. It's like a UUID, a unique identifier that can be resolved to a document that then explain the data, like what is actually this DID. So, And the way to resolve it can be resolved through the Bitcoin blockchain, can be resolved through the Ethereum blockchain, can be resolved off-chain. So it's private by default, but it can be made public. And then on top of that, you can add, there is this concept of verifiable credentials that basically enables many parties to kind of prove something about themselves. Like, for example, I am that person, I have that passport. So yeah, so my question is why the Ethereum community don't try to use the standards and create new ones? What those SBT adds, because it's like bound to an address, so you have to pay for it. Like as far as I understand, it's like an NFT, so you have to mint it, but it's expensive. Also, it's bound to one chain, not just like all of them. And the third thing I can see is that it's it's also public by default, and it's related to kind of your bank accounts. So why do we want our identity to be transferable? No, it's not transferable. Then if it's not transferable, why is it on chain? I just don't understand this. I'm very open to understand. I really want to understand. That's why I'm coming here. I'm very open. I don't have strong opinions. It's not personal. I just want to understand the technological side of it. Like why not using standards?
Yeah. So you said a lot. Hopefully I can hit all those points. And if I don't, then you can remind me of them. So we're definitely a fan of neutrality here. So operating on multiple chains and even multiple architectures, big fan of that. I actually don't think there's as big of a difference between the verifiable credentials community and SBTs than most people think. I think that in our paper, we actually acknowledge that the verifiable credentials are the sort of privacy extensions that are missing with SBTs. And we also acknowledge that mechanism verifiable credentials could benefit from community recovery, which is what we're thinking about as well. But community recovery could also be innovative in their community. So I don't actually see there's something inherently limited technologically with verifiable credentials that it couldn't be used as a substrate for this. The criticism was actually more ideological, and this idea around self-sovereign identity that, there's this conception that you have a backpack and you get to sort of unilaterally disclose information, right? And I just don't think we're going to have the larger kinds of networked decentralized coordination that we need to like get off the ground with that kind of disclosure system. It's like, I can walk you through a few examples. So like in terms of publicity, right? If I'm a lender, I would want to issue a loan on the condition of publicity, because if I don't, then there's a moral hazard problem with the borrower, right? They can hide that loan and take out more loans, and then that would make me unwilling to lend, right? Because of that moral hazard. So I want to issue on the condition of publicity under this sort of backpack model, which isn't necessary, by the way, like it could change, but under this sort of larger sort of ideological paradigm of, backpack privacy, that would give unilateral power of the recipient, right? And so there are other cases where, the recipient just has more power over the issuer, and what is a mutually consented relationship under this paradigm. Like say I was a publisher and I wanted to, I only want to publish on the condition that the author makes their name public, right? Under this sort of unilateral privacy model, like that doesn't happen. Or say I'm an artist and I want to issue an NFT on the condition that it's non-transferable and that it's also public. It becomes public art, right? If I can hide that in my backpack, right, and disclose it when I want, then it's not really public art, and it's not really capturing the mutual consent of the relationship between the issuer. The other thing is like, we're imagining issuers to be more peer-to-peer relationships, right? Like not all issuers are like corporate. We're not even thinking of the situation of issuers as governments and government IDs or issuers as corporations. We're thinking of peer-to-peer bottom-up coordination, right? Now there's other situations, and again, these limitations are not technological to verifiable credentials. Like they could be innovated in this way, but we're also thinking of more complex forms of, say, partial privacy, where I'm coordinating with my family and I want to share a, say, store of photos, but condition access to those store photos to family members, and the family members get to know all the other family members that have access. Or say I'm a community and I want to condition access to a shared lake for fishing, but that access is conditioned on everybody knowing who else has access. So that's like beyond this kind of self-sovereign paradigm, right? Already we're talking about people knowing what access controls, right, they have in each other's backpacks, and the backpack model sort of falls apart. Am I answering your question? Am I getting there?
Yeah, so if I understand well, you're saying that the difference that between verifiable credentials and like SBTs is that SBTs is by default public, and there are cases where you want this the fact that it's on chain is like available for everyone, and you don't have to kind of have this private, right? It's something like this.
No,
No?
some SBTs are public, like yeah, some SBTs or verifiable credentials you would want to make public. And I gave those cases earlier, like the artist, the lender, the publisher, even like professional societies. They want to, like if you're a member of the bar association, a lawyer, or a doctor, that information becomes public, because with those rights also come responsibilities, right? But there's also cases of partial privacy that's not public. Like not all the initial use cases that we gave in the paper were public SBTs, but we also talk a lot about programmable privacy and larger cooperations of individuals that say decompose rights of uses, abuses, and consumption, right, and profit amongst each other as groups, and they need to know who they're coordinating with, right? And so these cases of partial privacy are not really captured by this self-sovereign model of I have a backpack and I get to disclose when I want to disclose, right? Because you're cooperating with other people who also need to know who they're cooperating with on that particular, say around a particular resource, whether it be rights around a lake, or rights around access to a family album, or even rights to access a like family home, right? You as the issuer might say you're like a family issuing access to, you want not just to know who you're issuing to, but you want them to know each other. Okay, I know, my brother and my cousin also have access to this thing here. And so these are just like very simple examples. And in the paper, we talk about even more complex examples with data unions and data cooperatives, where you have, or complex coordinations of many individuals coming together, pooling their data together, and democratically deciding on the uses of that data, limited uses, and how the fruits of that are, will be distributed. And in those far more larger complex forms of cooperation, this idea of unilateral disclosure from my backpack, it doesn't even map onto the use case. So I think the larger point is not that like verifiable credentials are inherently limited, but we would like to expand the use cases that they're using today beyond these to capture these more complex forms of coordinations. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, but yeah,
sense?
thank you. I'm still not sure why this has to be on chain. This has to be an FTP.
Oh, so the question about does it have to be on chain? No, it doesn't have to be on chain. It can be also off-chain, right? There are some advantages around interoperability with smart contracts. There's like an Oracle problem you have to deal with if you have it off-chain, and trusted third parties there, and maybe some trust assumptions you don't want to make. But it might be the case that for the kind of plural programmable privacy that we think of large groups coordinating with each other, right, where people have partial information about each other, that neither blockchains or off-chain existing solutions are the right data architecture for that. So it's I wouldn't say that we are on-chain maxis, right? or off-chain maxis. We're more interested in capturing certain use cases and let a lot of experiments bloom here.
Yeah, it's nice to make experiments. I mean, yeah, if you guys can improve the space, I mean, it's good. Experimenting is the way to go.
I think there's a bunch of people, including myself, when I first saw it on Twitter, actually, when you see the word token, you take it for granted. Well, a token is obviously going to be on chain, right? Whereas, as you just explained, this doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
I mean, the other thing to think about is what audience were we writing this for, right?
Yeah.
And the whole point of the blockchain is that it's immutable. So I'm not an on-chain maxi myself, but I really don't see why you would not put something on-chain if you could, because it's interoperable, it's transparent, it holds blocks of information that cannot be censored. And the whole point of putting something like, I know this is an extreme use case, an edge case like indigenous land rights, so that a cartel cannot take over or an MNC cannot take over a piece of land and then you put on the land of a tribe. But even otherwise, like even enterprise blockchain, like even non-public blockchain, like private blockchain, I mean, the benefits to blockchain as a technology, the minting of blocks is sort of unparalleled at today's day and age. Like we could always, as humans, as a species, could always come up with something better. But my question is, why not on-chain?
Yeah, so the arguments also for on-chain is it creates this concept of like common knowledge, right? What do you do when you accept or you say you mint an SBT, right? You're creating common knowledge that event occurred, and whatever that SBT represents, whether it be an attestation that you are a member of some group, or whether it be permission or a right, it creates common knowledge that commitment has been made.
But is that necessarily the case, actually? Do you think that is necessarily the case? Like, as a privacy person, I'm kind of very interested in anonymous credentials, actually, right? It's like quite some wealth of work going into, well, how can we actually make anonymous credentials or re-anonymizable credentials actually work, where I can provide evidence of something and it's tied to me, and it could be like non-transferable, but it's not necessarily publicly disclosed, right?
Yeah, so we talk in the paper, like maybe just having the hash on chain and then having like ZK solutions, right? Exactly. And designated verifiers. And so, yeah, we need to, the privacy aspect of this needs to be worked out. And there is some, my point is like, there are cases where you want to be able to say selectively disclose, okay, I am right of this age, or I live in this place, right? But there are also cases where people might mutually consent to publicity, for example, in like loans, or say public art, or publishing, or right. Or there might also be cases where people want something in between, like partial privacy, where they're coordinating with a group of people and they just want to know who each other are, but not anybody else. And even amongst that group, they might want to like limit knowledge. Okay, who's getting like the rights of profit versus the rights of use. And there's this infinite number of ways where people can coordinate around different like privacy or specifications and arrangements.
May I say something? I want to at the end of the day, like if you need to have a credential, like to credential like your house, for example, like the title that say that you own your house. The person you're gonna trust for saying that, I mean, the entity that you're gonna trust for acknowledging that your house is your house is never gonna be the chain, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be the governments, because what happens, like, I don't know, you lose your keys or something is wrong on the chain. Is somebody gonna come and say, no, it's my house, right? How is that secure? How is that nice? Like, why would we want to live in that world? So I think if we acknowledge that this is a human problem and that we will always rely on on human organizations to do that, then because this information is fundamentally centralized in some ways, or it's not modeled correctly, in my opinion, for a blockchain. So that's why this information should be, in my opinion, something that you can use cryptography, you can use these tools to make it better, but you just won't solve the fundamental problems by using a blockchain, right? It's not like a coin, like Bitcoin, for example. It's not the same problem.
May I take a stab at that?
Yeah.
I think we're force-fitting use cases. We're not talking about IoT or robots that give you access to your house if you lose your pair of keys off the blockchain. It's more about proofs. All of blockchain is proofing, proof of identity.
You don't need blockchain to prove something. That's a mistake people make all the time. Cryptography is not just blockchain.
Exactly. I completely agree with you, but this is the force fitting of a case where it's like there is, let's assume you have ancestral land, or your parents own a home in the south of France, and there comes along a large cartel and they're like, no, we own this land, you don't own this land, and you've been part of a service where you've just put the land contract on the blockchain, and that's it. It's just proof with a timestamp at a block height in the past that verifies that your parents own that land.
You can verify it. You can verify it without having it. Without that, you have to be.
The fundamental difference of the blockchain is centralization versus decentralization. Yeah. So the only question here, Nicolas, is whether or not you put your faith in the centralized sources that you're surrounded with, based on where you're brought up, based on your professional upbringing, based on your personal upbringing, and it's whether that's a problem for people outside, like outside the first world, or
what if the thing on-chain is not right? What if the thing on-chain is not right? It's immutable, but it's not right. What do you do? Do you trust that? Do you accept this?
You yield governance to change it. No,
it's not like magically true.
Anything.
It comes like the interface between the real world and the blockchain is not trust proof. There can be mistakes, and by default it's immutable, but this is something that changes. So
I mean, there's always some margin of human error, but it's just about force-fitting use cases. For the cases that you're talking about, you just don't use proofing in a certain way. You just limit it to the proof of ownership.
No. I'm not saying we don't use cryptography. If you look at the verifiable credentials, it's all about cryptography. It's not that I don't think that we don't need any chain for anything. You can use a blockchain to discover identity of people, to discover some informations, but you don't need to put all the data on chain.
So I guess my question is, I'm not sure I follow. So if you could just be clear on what the use case is and what you see the difference with verifiable credentials, doing it that way or a blockchain way. As I said before, we're kind of on-chain, off-chain, like their benefits,
you can,
drawbacks to both, and so I'm not really sure what the
applications are.
Excuse me, guys. Excuse me. I have an answer for Nicolas. I am Joanna from Argentina, working in RadicalxChange. I am in crypto, in Ethereum ecosystem, and in Bitcoin. My view is, look, you have to see Ethereum. Sorry.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
I don't know who was speaking, but I continue because it's important what I am saying, guys.
Okay.
Ethereum is like a small blockchain to show to the entire humanity how we have to move to the next level of the Web3.
Okay.
Where every one of us, it's not funny, where every one of us had to be connect our wallets with our identity. No more bots, no more avatars, no more unknown people. So Ethereum and SBT is the way to show in a small community how it works and show to the humanity that we have to do this on-chain in all the entire Web3 as a big global blockchain. You know, this is the way. So everything that they are doing on the blockchain, on Ethereum, is the example to move with Bitcoin global. Okay, this is my view, and because of this, I am here as well.
So
Okay,
let me do just like a counter proposal to that, right? So you always have to be able to steel man the other side of the argument, right? So like here's the other side of the argument. So what is the point of DSOC? The point of DSOC is to lay out a way to build decentralized networks for the 21st century, decentralized being key. What does decentralization mean, right? So there's Vitalik actually wrote a really great blog post about decentralization a few years ago, and there's kind of different dimensions. One, you can think about decentralization of economic or ownership resources, right? Another dimension is also architectural decentralization. So you're not stuck with a system and that system as a single point of failure, right? So in that sense, we do want to have a plurality of architectures here and experiments, and not commit ourselves to like one chain futures, right? I don't think there's a solution. Like DSOC was not intended to be the solution, and if anybody thinks that this is the solution, like disabuse yourself of that notion right now. Like when we stop critiquing technology, then technology starts to own us and govern us, right? So I think a healthy debate and criticism and thinking about plurality of architectures here is really important. And as I said, it might not act, and in the paper we say, can SBTs even do this? Like parentheses, question mark, right? It might be that there's a kind of different sort of data architecture, maybe one, and even in the last paragraph we talk about distributed trust relationships across data stores, right? It might be something like that, but this is sort of like to be researched, and definitely not something to like dig your heels into.
No, I don't have strong opinions. I'm just here to debate technology and ideas. I don't,
for sure,
don't have any strong opinions.
I'm still manning your side of the argument.
I actually have a question to maybe move us off the off-chain or on-chain topic, but really what we're doing with an SBT is like we're testing something, right? We're proving something, but like we kind of take for granted that that's a good idea. And that's a good idea for a lot of things. But I would like to take the counter side of some examples where there's not a good example, where there's not a good idea. There's been some pretty good discussion on these so-called dark DAOs, right? So basically, do we build this technology to make vote buying or essentially influencing of others more easy, right? That would be bad. We don't want that outcome. And basically, when I read that, what I found quite fascinating is what we want is actually something that is receipt-free, right? I don't want to have a receipt that I voted for or against someone. And now my question is, isn't actually an SBT a receipt for a certain thing? And in that regard, therefore, also dangerous?
Yeah, so if the concern there's actually like two levels of concerns. So one concern is that, okay, I lay out even a small number of public SBTs. Again, not all SBTs should be public, but even a small number of SBTs. And by the way, it's a pseudonymous proposal, right? So assuming you have like multiple souls, maybe your health soul, your political soul, and then these sort of get like correlated. Some AI or person, right, figures that out and then starts kind of like manipulating, right? Yeah. So that's one concern. The other concern is like where and this is the Dark DAO paper, where you think that you are operating right in a system, and there's like another system on top of that, right? That's just kind of like pulling the strings.
Like vote buying, for example.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, those are like really serious questions and concerns, and that's actually kind of comes into a lot of the research areas that like Flashbots is working on, and Phil Dion was the author of that paper, and he's the founder of Flashbots. So I wish he was here to join us, because he can tell you on what are the exact bottlenecks there on transcriptability and so on and so forth. So yeah, these are major research areas and problems that need to be solved, and we shouldn't pretend like they don't exist.
Yeah.
And we kind of alluded to that on the challenge of building communication channels.
Yeah.
That communication channels is like a gesture towards that area of research.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think let me turn it around. Where can we do this safely, right?
Yeah.
Where can we experiment with this safely? So you want a community. First of all, the SBT should be useful. We shouldn't just like adopt them because like we want to have SBTs because there's a paper that a few people signed on to that says SBTs are interesting. They should actually do something for us, right? And so what are communities that could really benefit from SBTs? Well, given the limitation of our technology today, in SBTs and also in verifiable credentials for that matter, our first use cases should be something that has like publicity, right? And what community relies on a high level of publicity but is having a really hard time coordinating? Scientific communities, right?
Yeah.
Because scientists, what do scientists have to do to excel in their field? They have to publish their research publicly, right? In journals. They have to peer review for those journals, otherwise they don't get published. In that sense, they're extorted. And it's through these very public status symbols of being published in prestigious journals that you rise in your field. And so what is a coordination problem? The coordination problem is you have this rent extractor sitting there between researchers called journals, right? The top 5 journals publish like at least 70% of the papers in like science and humanities and so on. And they're just pure rent extractors, right? They're not doing the peer review work. They're not doing the research. They're just collecting tolls. And meanwhile, like researchers don't get paid, peer reviewers don't get paid. Universities have to pay for the research which they subsidize, right? And science stays closed.
Buy it back in the end.
And buy it back, right? Right, yeah, exactly. To like buy back, right? It's and even like governments that subsidize research, right? They don't even get to see it. The taxpayers don't get to see it. So science stays closed. And this is just like a net negative for everybody. It's a huge negative externality. And what does this actually do? They're like even secondary effects, because only the universities that can afford to see the research get access to the research. And then this creates like an inequality in the production of scientific knowledge. So like the scientific community could really benefit from a different way to coordinate. And so if you think of SBTs as representing your already public credentials, right, and affiliations and memberships, scientists could represent those, right, through SBTs. And they're very sort of covetous in policing other scientists and saying, hey, actually, no, you're not the person who published that paper. Somebody else with the same name from another university did that, right? So it's kind of like a community that can like self-police this. And they could kind of represent what their status affiliations are. And you can even take it a step further, put some money in a DAO. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, and say, pay researchers and pay peer reviewers to do the work that journals are asking them to do, or really extorting them to do for free, right? And actually pay them and fork away these monopolistic rent extractors and create a more regenerative scientific knowledge production system where people are actually paid to research, paid to review, and they're bootstrapping off of their decentralized reputation and carrying forward. And then there's all sorts of other benefits, like science goes from being closed to suddenly being open. And then you can think of even using SBTs to allow more plural partial arrangements in research where scientists collaborate with other scientists and even computing over SBTs to like draw on people from like intersectional areas of scientists, like biologists and physicists coming together, right, to form plural forms of science. So that's like a great use case. That's like a wonderful place to test incentives. That's where everybody, even universities are maximally aligned to start giving away these credentials because they're just being rent extracted, right?
And they are certainly not foreign to the concept of giving out credentials.
Yeah, yeah, that's what they do, right? That's their business, right?
Hey guys, I would like to add something because I am understanding, I am connecting the dots, and maybe this can clarify to the common people, because we have to decentralize the intellectual stuff as well, and to communicate very simple to allow everyone to understand and to make this massive, okay? So I am connecting the dots, and the thing is, like, SBT are more like verified credentials for university. And you know what I am understanding now? Do you know in Latin, when you refer to a university, you say alma mater. Alma mater is Harvard alma mater, Stanford alma mater, you know? So alma, I am Latina from Argentina, alma is Latin word. In English is soul. So when you are using soul bones, it's very connected with alma mater and universities. And adding this with you, Puja, because you are talking about the scientifics and the people who is working in universities, you know, in scientists. So this is very related with verified credentials. So when we are talking about SBT, let's connect with verified credentials, certification from universities, and something like that. But there is something bigger than this, that is decentralized identity with our passports. That is, we need to solve the ID global crypto challenge, that is connect our wallet's ID with our real ID passport. When we are trading money, when we are doing whatever we are doing, when we are going to university, we show our passport, right? So, well, in the global digital jurisdiction of planet Earth, we also have to do that. So this is the goal. We are starting for universities, alma mater, Soulbound, that we are moving to solve the web-free identity with every passport of every people in the planet Earth.
So the point about VCs and Soulbound tokens, like, so you could, in this example that I gave with scientific communities, you could bootstrap it off of verifiable credentials too. And you can consider them like soul-bound verifiable credentials or community-bound verifiable credentials where there's publicity, right? The technology of, as I said, is not, verifiable credentials could be like tinkered in this way and done this way. And it's just a question of whether people are willing to step out of the ideology of, I'm gonna keep things in my backpack and like unilaterally disclose it. If they do that, if they do have some, say, public verifiable credentials, if scientists did that, then you could have really much more richer forms of cooperation and coordination, forking away the journals, the rent extractive journals, but not just doing that, but creating research DAOs, those research DAOs being mutually governed by the scientific community and or a particular community. And those research DAOs, say, adding on new functions like peer reproducibility on top of peer review, and using soul-bound verifiable credentials or soul-bound tokens to coordinate those activities and reproducibility, because you know, credentials can also represent certifications to labs, and you can start bringing in certified labs to reproduce experiments and so on. So it's really, and this was a presentation I was going to give on science, but I decided to kind of hold off and just—
That's good. I like the discussion we had.
Yeah, hear what everybody else has to say, but maybe I can give the deeper dive on how we do science, rethinking, moving from closed science to open science another day.
That's cool. It's a topic that I'm passionate about. Was one of the reasons why I left the academic environment.
Yeah.
I would actually like to ask, is there anybody who has not yet spoken who has a question for Puja? We kind of a little bit over the hour, but if there's anybody, I see Nico has a question. Before we get there, is there anybody who has not yet spoken who would like to ask something, have some comments? Cool. Nico, you have another one. We don't hear you.
So thank you very much for this presentation. I think I understand better what is the SBTs now. It's interesting. I just wanted to say, it's very interesting what you said about science, because at Protocol Labs, there are many people who are trying to bring also scientists to IPFS and Filecoin, and they try to make them use also DIDs to identify the papers. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I think I understand it more. That's all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nico. Any other questions from anyone?
I guess I had a question, but maybe it's too late. I just wanted to say, yeah, what those, like, how those you will be able to kind of finance CR, like how will you be able to like pay people using SBTs rather than like IPFS, for example? Like what those SBTs, how those SBT help to finance researchers rather than using something like IPFS, for example, to store, or Filecoin to store the papers, which is also, yeah.
I think you can use IPFS to the storage solution. I don't think the Soulbound tokens will like pay researchers. I'm just saying Soulbound tokens are just, or verifiable credentials for that matter, right?
Yeah,
if, you know, public, like they represent your credentials and memberships and affiliations. And if you make it public, right, if scientific community made it public, which they do anyway, right? It's like that's their whole career, is making this information about themselves public. Then suddenly, right, they can bootstrap, right, into reputation networks that recreate the functions of a journal in the form of a research DAO. And it doesn't take because nobody's getting paid right now, like no science, you know, no research and no peer review is getting paid. Just like a small of money in a research DAO, like not even a lot, right, could potentially be enough to say fork away activities from like Cell or Nature to a research DAO that is actually community owned and governed by like the scientists themselves, using some of the mechanisms that we described. So it's not like the Soulbound tokens is going to like give them money. It just allows them to coordinate amongst each other away from the rent extractor, which they're under the thumb of right now, and, you know, recreate the functions and maybe even do it better, probably do it even better, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right. Thank you, Puja, so much for coming on here and inviting us to give us a bit of glimpse of what's going on there in this early stage of this new microcosm that I think is starting to grow. I really appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for your really interesting discussions and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
It's okay.